EuroJam 2024, Talk Nummer 4. Bitte begrüßt den ehemaligen griechischen Ministerpräsidenten Carlos Kiri Prothipouye. Please welcome Alexis Tsipras.
Thank you very much for your good words. It is an honor for me to be here, and I'm very impressed for this event, and especially for the fact that so many young people are here. It's not something usual for political events especially. So the organizers asked me to speak about Europe. I asked them for details, but they said to me, you can say whatever you want. So I will say whatever I want, but I believe that especially this year, on the Day of Europe, we need a sincere debate about Europe. Not only because we are in the middle of successive crises that have changed political realities and increased inequalities, but because we are witnessing two wars in our neighborhood. And unfortunately, Europe is not playing any decisive role for them to end. Two wars that contribute more and more to a climate of insecurity that lays the ground for far-right politics and for Euroscepticism and anti-Europeanism. In this context, the upcoming European elections, I think, and I'm afraid that will sound a very worrying alarm regarding the future of Europe. And let's not forget that tomorrow we're not celebrating only the Day of Europe, but the day of the victory of the people of Europe against fascism and Nazism. And the crucial question is why nearly 80 years later, the fascist ideas are returning to Europe. The fact that Europe is going through a deep existential crisis, is it not a new one? Even conservative or liberal politicians admit it. We Europeans are facing a triple existential danger on the level of security, economy and society. President Macron said that recently. But the crucial issue is how we respond to these existential dangers. We should move on with a change of paradigm and become more powerful and competitive, President Macron proposes. And I'm certain that all of you have heard the relevant arguments that we need to strengthen our defense capabilities, to develop a dynamic industrial policy, particularly in new technologies and renewable energy, and to shield democratic institutions from the negative aspects of social media. I agree with all of them, but this is not, I'm afraid, a real change of European paradigm. 20 years ago, European elites gave the same answers in the question, what's the future of Europe? They said we need to become stronger and stronger and more competitive. But this proved not to be enough. Recently, 2 months ago, I visited in Paris a group of young activists. And remember the time that I was also a young activist. And I was an activist of the European Social Forum, and we demonstrated at that time against neoliberal globalization in big demonstrations in the cities that hosted European Council summits or summit of G8, in Genova and elsewhere else, and in Florence were very big demonstrations at that time. And the young activists in Paris asked me what we believed in at that time. I told them that we believe that the neoliberal aspects of globalization, as well as American military interventions, would lead the world to economic crisis and even more conflicts. And I remember our motto at that time, our message: another world is possible, another Europe is possible. And we said not only possible, but also necessary. Necessary not for ideological reasons, but because only in this way could Europe survive as something more than a common market and have a positive contribution to the lives of its citizens. Of course, in those years, European leaders spoke with great confidence about Europe. I remember the German Chancellor visited Greece in 1999, declaring that the prosperity of Greece and Germany must be combined and that everything had been done properly. And in the summer of 2007, when Greece managed at that time to secure the best ratings from international agencies, another chancellor visited Athens and praised Greece's achievement of 4% growth, saying that this is a dream also for Germany. And I suppose that everybody of you remember what happened 1 year after, not only in Greece, but in Europe as a whole. 1 year after, 1 year later, the economic crisis was there. And in the same period, Western forces withdrew from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, recognizing tacitly the tragic consequences of the so-called war on terror or the so-called spreading democracy. Part of the consequences were, of course, the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. So, having had these experiences, I believe we cannot talk about reinforcing Europe's strength and competitiveness if we do not also say clearly what we want Europe's position in the world to be and how we want it to contribute to the lives of its citizens. Otherwise, we are not talking about strengthening Europe, but about strengthening European elites. Otherwise, we are just buying time until the next crisis, maybe contributing to the crisis coming sooner. On the economic level, Europe's business as usual logic has to be abandoned. It is a disaster to wait for the next crisis in order to develop, after the crisis, the institutions we needed before. The recovery fund and the issuance of common debt, of course, are important steps. But imagine how much pain would have been avoided if they had been developed before the financial crisis. That is why I believe that we must move ahead immediately with the changes we know we need. First, by establishing a permanent European tool for issuing common debt to support public goods such as health, education, research, but also to address two existential dangers, the demographic crisis and the climate crisis, including climate disasters and the just transition to a green agenda. Second, by increasing the EU's own resources by taxing wealth effectively. Given that only the 10% of Europeans hold 67% of European wealth. Third, we do not just need a strong industrial policy that will benefit already privileged areas, but a powerful financial tool for regional industrial policy that will tackle regional and social inequalities. In foreign policy, we need a strategically autonomous Europe, but that does not just mean buying weapons. And it is not enough to stand with Ukrainians against the Russian invasion or with Israelis against the terrorist attacks of Hamas. Europe must be at the forefront in supporting peace, in supporting international law, as well as multilateralism in a multipolar world. A new Cold War may be in the interests of some powers and industries, but it is at the expense of Europe. As is the message of double standards, as thousands of Palestinians are killed by Israeli operations on European borders. So it's extremely important for the EU to actively support immediate ceasefire in Gaza with return of all hostages as well as the restart of talks for a solution on the basis of the UN resolutions. And it is important also to fight for peace on the basis of international law in Ukraine. As it is important to promote European enlargement, particularly the Western Balkans, and the restart of talks on the Cyprus issue. A Europe that has no credibility in its neighborhood can have no ambitions to be a strong diplomatic force beyond it. In other words, I can say that we believe in Europe and in European patriotism because we believe in European principles, not just in European strength. A Europe which identifies with American priorities, even when this is at the expense of its interests, is a Europe without future. A Europe striving for its energy and economic independence from Russia and China must also claim its strategic autonomy in relation to the US, to the United States, while maintaining a strong transatlantic dialogue. Finally, in the field of democratic institutions, tackling disinformation is important, but I think it is not enough also. We are facing a whole network of far-right forces that reproduce ideas outside as well as inside the parties of the traditional right. That is why we must also fight on the battle of ideas and values, for tolerance and support diversity, for a fair migration policy based on respect for international law, and for the rule of law. And we have witnessed what happened when the rule of law is undermined. In Greece, in my country, we had the biggest phone-tapping scandal in Europe. Or we had these disasters with the drowning of 600 refugees last year in Pylos, but nothing happened till now. Or we remember what happened in Brussels with Qatar Gate, or when European officials are accused of corruption. So these are some symptoms that are responsible for the fact that every day we are seeing citizens who have lost trust in Europe, in national and European politics generally, and move from abstention to anti-politics and to the far right. We must make it clear that the answer is not anti-politics or meta-politics that focuses on going viral rather than mobilizing people on progressive policies. Our goal should be to bring citizens closer to politics and politics closer to citizens. To use digital technology to create collective and open political processes that help us shape and claim our common future, without giving in to the logic and messaging of conservative values, but also without using political doctrines. We need new progressive policies that focus on improving each aspect of citizens' lives. So, concluding my speech, I wanted to come back in Paris, in the young activists. They asked me also if I had the chance, as a Prime Minister, to accomplish what I was fighting for as an activist many years before. I answered to them that, unfortunately, I did not manage to do all the things I dreamed of. But I'm proud, because we fought for many of them and achieved some of them, and especially under very difficult conditions. I'm proud that we fought for peace. I'm proud that we tried to solve the Cyprus problem, and we resolved finally the Macedonian name issue, giving a new momentum to the European perspective of the region. I'm proud that we managed to fight austerity. I'm not sure how effectively, but we fought austerity. And finally, we managed to get a country that lost 25% of its GDP out of the economic crisis back to growth while protecting the most vulnerable people. And I'm proud because we handled the worst refugee crisis in decades as humanly as we could, without the violent policy of pushbacks that many Europeans urged us to implement. And of course, I'm proud that we made important breakthroughs in human rights. However, I told them, we did not succeed in the great goal to create another Europe, or even another Greece. And I can say to you that this is the reason why we have to continue fighting, because this is a common struggle. This is not a struggle only for governments, but it is for citizens and for the peoples of Europe. The next European elections constitute a turning point. They will either move us forward if progressive forces are strengthened, or they will take us backward. The fight for another Europe that will be both powerful and social must continue. Not only because it is possible to have another Europe, but because, as I said 20 years ago, it is more necessary, not 20 years ago, today, more necessary today than ever. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.